welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. Still a ton of questions about millionaire and registered sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. We'll have the latest there. Plus the fate of Obamacare. Health care for millions of people could hang in the balance. And Team USA taking a victory lap after their World Cup win. But first, here are your headlines.
There's word from Dallas that H. Ross Perot, twice a presidential candidate, has died at age 89 from leukemia.
My name's Tom Steyer. I'm running for president.
Billionaire political activist Tom Steyer has announced he will enter the 2020 race for president as a Democrat. Steyer is known for his efforts to push for the impeachment of President Trump. Steyer says he will use over $100 million of his own money to finance his political campaign.
The Justice Department is wrangling together a new team of lawyers trying to include a citizenship question on next year's census. In San Francisco, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the real reason for the question is derived from the president's signature slogan, "Make America Great Again."
Make America white again. They want to make sure that people, certain people, are counted. It's really disgraceful, and it's not what our founders had in mind.
We begin with the latest on Jeffrey Epstein, the wealthy financier and registered sex offender who has been charged with sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy. Some of those charges are dating back over a decade. So our Tom Yamas has the latest. Tom?
Hey, Kimberly, mega millionaire Jeffrey Epstein is hoping a judge grants him bail, but prosecutors are trying to fight that, arguing that his extreme wealth, including access to 2 private jets, make him a flight risk. The FBI says when they raided his home here in Manhattan, they found hundreds, if not thousands, of photos of nude women, many seeming to appear to be underage. Now, yesterday we were there in court when he heard his charges, Epstein pleading not guilty. His attorneys are arguing that this feels like double jeopardy because years ago, Epstein struck a deal with federal prosecutors in Florida over similar crimes, granting him immunity after he pleaded guilty to a lesser charge. But prosecutors are now saying that was only for Florida, not for New York. The U.S. attorney who struck that deal is Alexander Acosta, the current labor secretary, and now Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi is calling on him to resign. Kimberly?
All right. Thank you, Tom. And I want to stay on this story and bring in Aaron Katursky. Thank you for being here today. I just want to start and ask you, why is this happening now?
That's a great question. Yeah. And we put that question to the U.S. attorney in New York who brought the charges. And really, he didn't provide an answer because this has been investigated over the last 15 years. Mm-hmm. This case was about to be brought in 2008 before Alex Acosta gave him the deal that Tom just outlined. And it's sort of been around, but now prosecutors are moving forward, and it may be because they read an account in the Miami Herald which detailed the then secret deal that Epstein had arranged. And the victims have become more vocal as well, saying that they've never had their day in court. And you heard U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman from the Southern District of New York say that the victims deserve their day in court, and they're going to give it to them.
Yeah, one thing I'm curious about, you mentioned that this has been going on for a while. How was Jeffrey Epstein able to evade justice for so long?
Well, if you listen to his defense attorneys, Epstein thought they had what the defense called a global solution to all of this. He pleaded guilty to lesser state charges back in 2008, served 13 months in a county jail. He wasn't there very much. He was on work release for most of it. And he thought that was it. And he's maintained his lavish lifestyle. In fact, his arrest on Saturday came when his private plane flew in from his residence in Paris. So he still maintains 6 residences, including his own island in the Caribbean. He has infinite wealth, prosecutors said, and that's part of the reason why they consider him a risk of flight.
Yeah. So a lot of people have said that this case was mishandled, back in the day, in particular, the handling that with Alexander Acosta, who's now the labor secretary in the Trump administration. So what does that connection mean for this case?
Well, it's interesting. When prosecutors yesterday said in open court that they had found nude photos of females, many of whom appeared to be underage, perhaps hundreds, perhaps thousands of those images, it added fuel to that argument that if prosecutors knew about this, back in 2008. How do you let that guy get off so lightly? And so there are still nagging questions. And in fact, we just heard from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor say that Acosta not only needs to answer this, the Labor Department needs to come clean. And if he doesn't want to resign, he should be fired. On the other hand, Acosta has said, look, this was a legitimate agreement. It required Epstein to serve some time. It wasn't terrible time, but some time, and he had to register as a sex offender. So Acosta has defended this deal. But it puts the Justice Department, interestingly, on two sides of the coin. On one hand, this was negotiated in secret, and they're not supposed to do that. The accusers are supposed to have a say. And so the Justice Department, on one hand, is saying, look, we kind of messed up a little bit.
Right.
Now they're saying that the accusers need their day in court. So they are saying that for Epstein's victims, and they've asked for more to come forward, this may finally be the justice that they're seeking.
What does this say about our justice system, though, in general, though, when someone like Jeffrey Epstein is getting these sweetheart deals?
For many, and this deal was controversial from the start, this is rich person's justice. Someone who was, really isolated, lived literally in a palace, one of the nicest homes in Manhattan on East 71st Street, and a palatial estate in Palm Beach, to say nothing of his home in Paris, and the place in the U.S. Virgin Islands and the place on the other Caribbean island, and somebody who had connections and who had money and who was able to get himself a rather lenient deal by all accounts. On the other hand, prosecutors say none of that matters now because they filed these federal sex trafficking charges. He faces 45 years in prison, which at age 66 could amount to a life sentence if found guilty.
Absolutely. So, Aaron, while you're here, I want to ask you about another case that I know you've been following, and that's a highly controversial case that's making headlines, the Kevin Spacey trial. There was a bit of back and forth in court with the accuser. So what do we know about what's going on there?
This is the first time the now 21-year-old, who was a teenager at the time, was accused Kevin Spacey of groping him in a Nantucket bar in 2016, actually had to appear in court in connection with the criminal case. And at one point, he took the fifth. There's some evidence that seems to have gone missing. There's a cell phone that the defense has put as the linchpin of the case because it contained text messages that discuss the night of the alleged groping. And some of the messages were deleted. And while the accuser said in open court he didn't really know about it, the defense attorney pressed him and said, well, do you know that deleting text messages is a crime? And that's when he decided that he would invoke his right against self-incrimination. Without his testimony, the case is really teetering. And even the judge said this may have to be dismissed.
Yeah, so glad you're here. Definitely want you to keep us updated on those because both a long way to go, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
Epstein's just beginning and Kevin Spacey may be nearing the end.
Yes. So Aaron Katersky, thank you so much for joining us on set. And guys, we move on. A diplomatic spat continues between the U.S. and the U.K. President Trump calling Kim Derrick, which is the U.K. ambassador to the U.S., a very stupid guy and a pompous fool. And this comes after some diplomatic cables were leaked showing the U.K. ambassador criticizing President Trump and his administration, calling Trump inept and incompetent. So I want to bring in Karen Travers at the White House and James Longman in our London bureau. Karen, what does this do for the relations between the U.S. and the U.K.?
Well, this certainly isn't going to make things all warm and fuzzy between the U.S. and the U.K. And this isn't the first time we've seen the president with some really tough words for, a very close ally of the United States. He's been very critical of Theresa May over the past year and a half over her handling of Brexit. And now, Kimberly, he's essentially telling Theresa May that she's got to get rid of the British ambassador to the U.S. I'll let James get into their side of things. But it is striking to see these leaked cables talk about how, the president radiates insecurity and that they don't think the administration will ever look competent. And the president's response to that is to aim these really personal insults at Sir Kim Derrick, calling him wacky and a very stupid guy. So people will certainly say perhaps the president's proving his point there by talking about how thin-skinned the president can be. And the president just isn't one to let insults like this go by without a response.
Yeah, and James, what was the response from the British government, and how big of a problem will this be for the new prime minister?
Well, real embarrassment, I think, on this side of the pond, Kimberly. You know, this country really values its relationship with the United States, and so there was a scramble at the Foreign Office to respond. But basically, they came down on the side of their man, which I think probably put Donald Trump's nose out of joint slightly. They said that they didn't really agree with what Sir Kim Darroch was saying, the substance of those cables, but that ultimately he has the right to say them. It's his job. He's paid to make an assessment of what he thinks of US politics and the sort of political climate in the United States. And so, you know, and also I should say this isn't the first time we've seen this sort of thing happen. In the WikiLeaks a few years ago, US Foreign Service personnel, their private cables were leaked, and they were very disparaging about European politicians as well. So I think most people feel in this country that, you know, members of our Foreign Service have a right to say certain things privately, and that those private messages shouldn't be sent further afield. I think there's probably something, though, also, Kimberly, in the kind of language used. You know, Brits are perhaps known for being able to kind of find a witty turn of phrase or a particularly disparaging way of saying something. You know, for instance, in that line, calling him calling the White House uniquely dysfunctional, or saying that Donald Trump radiated insecurity. I think those sorts of phrases really stung. So it wasn't just that Sir Kim Darroch doesn't think much of Donald Trump. It's the way he'd said it that I think really upset the president. There is an investigation going on at the moment here in the United Kingdom. We're told it's a cross-departmental investigation. They want to get to the bottom of this leak. A suggestion that perhaps it was leaked by a pro-Brexit civil servant who feels perhaps that Sir Kim Darroch is an anti-Brexit ambassador, trying to get rid of him, hoarding these messages since 2017. So Brexit, as always is the case, it seems, in this country at the moment, colouring everything that goes on. And yes, you're right, a new Prime Minister we will have in just over a week. That could be Boris Johnson. That, of course, he is the preferred candidate of Donald Trump. It'll be up to him to decide what to do next. Sir Kim's tour ends in 6 months, but he could be forced to make him come home sooner. Kimberly?
And James, before we go, how unusual is it for something like this to happen?
I mean, it is very unusual in the sense that we don't normally get access to these kinds of cables from ambassadors at this sort of level. These messages are really only meant for a handful of people back in London. But I have to say, over the last few years, particularly since Brexit, it's really caused a lot of division here in the United Kingdom. And we've seen this government be beset by scandals around leaks. More and more leaks are coming out of various different factions in government who aren't happy with the other side, if you like, those who voted to remain and those who voted to leave. So it has been happening more and more, and I think under a new Prime Minister, a lot of people are hoping that we take back control, if you like. That was one of the big phrases of the Brexit campaign, but take back control also of our government. So yes, very unusual to see these sorts of messages, but unfortunately in recent years here in the United Kingdom, not unusual for leaks to come out.
All right, James Longman, want to thank you so much. And Karen, if you can, I would love for you to stick around because we're staying in Washington, where a federal appeals court is deciding the fate of Obamacare. A group of 18 Republican-led states backed by the Trump administration is asking the court to invalidate the law. This is a decision that will no doubt impact health care for millions of Americans. So I want to bring in our Devin Dwyer in our D.C. bureau. Devin, good to see you. No ruling today, but this is huge. If this happens, if this judge strikes this down, how will this impact people?
Yeah, this is absolutely an enormous case, Kimberly, one that everyone should pay attention to. Even if you get your health insurance from your employer, which most Americans do, this case has huge implications for the healthcare system. As you said, millions of Americans get their coverage through Obamacare. 7 months ago, a federal judge down in Texas struck down the entire law, said it should be wiped entirely off the books. Today, they're appealing that case, and these judges are going to really consider whether or not it can stand. All the things that are on the table are the most popular provisions of Obamacare. We talk a lot about those protections for people with pre-existing conditions. 52 million Americans have those protections. If that gets wiped off the books, insurance companies can charge more if you're sick. They can deny you coverage if you're sick. We talk about mandatory preventive care services. All of us that have insurance plans, even through our employer now, you get that free annual checkup included. That was mandated by Obamacare. You also had the Medicare and Medicaid expansion, rolling health care benefits out to a lot of low-income Americans. 20 million Americans get their benefits there. So a lot of things on the line here. If this is struck down and upheld, this law is really part of the fabric of our country, even though it has been so unpopular over the years, Kim.
And Karen, you know, obviously, if there's a replacement to Obamacare, then you have to, if you repeal Obamacare, then you have to have a replacement. So wondering if the Republicans have a plan.
No, they certainly do not. And we saw the first 2 years of the Trump presidency, the Republicans on Capitol Hill try and fail to do what they had been promising for many years, to repeal and replace Obamacare. The president, however, wants to continue pushing on this. He says he has a plan that's coming out in a couple of months, but Kimberly, White House officials say there's no plan that is in the works. Instead, we're still expecting from the White House a set of principles of what the president would like to see in a health care plan, but that's nothing new. The president's pretty clear about what he'd like to see done. So it is striking, the case that Devin mentioned in Texas, where that judge, a federal judge, struck down the entire thing. The White House signed on and said that they supported that. But at the same time, the president says he doesn't want to get rid of pre-existing conditions. He wants to keep the popular provisions of Obamacare, and there's no plan to replace it. I think it's also important to note that Republicans on Capitol Hill, leaders like Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, have told the president, we are not dealing with health care in the next year and a half. They are not willing to take this up because it is very complicated and controversial, and they don't feel it's a winning argument for them heading into an election year. The president, we've heard him say many times, thinks it would be a good issue for Republicans, except nobody is standing behind him and ready to take up that fight. Kimberly?
Right, but Devin, the timing of this means it will be a conversation in the 2020 race, right?
Oh, definitely, Kimberly. It actually already is. And in fact, many Republicans that Karen was talking about secretly hope that the courts will uphold the law and simply take all of this off the table. You remember from the midterm campaign that health care was the top issue on voters' minds. It's atop the list again headed into the presidential election season. Democrats won that one at the polls in 2018. Health care was something that helped them sweep into more seats in the House of Representatives. As Karen said, because the president and Republicans don't have a plan, this really puts them in a tough spot if, in fact, this is still in the bloodstream headed into the November 2020 elections.
All right. I want to thank Karen Travers, and I want to thank Devin Dwyer. You'll see him later on the briefing room at 3:30. Thank you both for joining us today. And guys, we turn to some severe weather, summer weather, lots of flash flooding in the D.C. area. It got so bad in several parts that people needed to be rescued from their homes and their cars. So Stephanie Ramos is in Arlington, Virginia with more. Stephanie?
I'm ABC's Stephanie Ramos in Arlington, Virginia. Take a look at some of the damage the storms left behind here in northern Virginia. The weather's so forceful, it ripped this pedestrian bridge off of its foundation. Evidence of just how powerful yesterday's storms were. Overnight, extensive flooding in the Rockies and Plains, up to 9 inches of rain falling in Nebraska. The summer thunderstorms hitting Kearney hard, paralyzing drivers after encountering the massive amounts of rain. In Fargo, North Dakota, the water forcing people to abandon their cars, and the flooding wrath stretched from the hills of Maryland to the D.C. metro area and Virginia. At this park in Frederick, Maryland, raging waters created these waterfalls. In D.C., dozens of water rescues, people jumping onto the tops of their cars for safety. And check out this D.C. metro station. A waterfall plunged through the ceiling, and even the White House getting its basement flooded. During the height of the storm, 911 calls were pouring into dispatchers. Officials in Maryland tell us they received 250 calls in a 3-hour period alone. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured. I'm Stephanie Ramos in Northern Virginia, and you're watching ABC News Live.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. That looks devastating. And with that, we're going to take a look at the weather across the country with Ginger Z. Ginger?
Kimberly, thank you. I'm standing here. Beautiful sunrise in Oklahoma, and we're in for a hot one. I mean, heat index will be right up around 100 again today, but that's not where the headlines take us. We have all of our focus on the Gulf of Mexico. Going right into this weekend is when we're going to be looking for the impacts from what could be a tropical depression. It looks likely that that'll form. Here's what it is right now. It's a little disturbance, just some thunderstorms. It's how all really tropical cyclones form. Then it's going to move over the open water. That's when we're going to see trouble start. So that's Wednesday when it starts to open up and become something. One of our short-term models takes it a little farther west, and so does the European model. It looks like it's right around northeast Texas into, say, Lake Charles, Louisiana, over to New Orleans. But we're going to keep kind of the broad brush of anybody from Houston to Mobile and even Pensacola in for heavy rain by this weekend. And here's why. A lot of the spaghetti plots are not coming together quite yet. But remember, too, that this can be very lopsided. You can have heavy rain fall far outside of the center of whatever ends up forming. So 5 to 10 inches of rain as we go into really Friday, Saturday, right? So that's the Houston to Pensacola headline. Then there was this, all of the flooding, the flash flooding in the mid-Atlantic. I know you've been telling stories about it, but it was 3 to 6 inches. A lot of places got a month's worth of rain in about an hour. And so that's when you see damage like this in Maryland. That has moved on, and now we're going to watch for severe storms that could, yes, have flash flooding, but certainly damaging winds. I think today the big threats for Rapid City, it's parts of Nebraska. And then as this front slides across the middle of the country, we're going to open it up in Champaign, Illinois, St. Louis, up to Chicago, Kenosha, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Madison, over to Madison's right on the edge there, but over to Lansing, Michigan, certainly Grand Rapids, Michigan, Traverse City. All in the severe storms forecast today. And I wanted to just leave you with something a little lighter, because we know we had that epic ski season, that snowy, snowy winter. This is Squaw Valley, California. They just closed. That's a time lapse of their final ski and snowboard of the season. I'm sure they're ready to go again. And don't worry, it could be just a month away. Kimberly?
Thank you, Ginger. We appreciate it. Guys, so we've been keeping you updated on the Hong Kong protest. You've seen the images over the last few weeks. Millions of people in the semi-autonomous Chinese territory protesting in the streets against a bill that would extradite criminals back to mainland China, a bill they feel encroaches on their civil rights and their democracy. Well, demonstrators succeeded, at least in the short term. Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam saying the efforts to amend this particular bill are dead, though. But protest leaders opposed to Lam's administration said they will continue their demonstrations. So we'll see what happens next. We'll keep you updated on all of that. And guys, before we go, we're going to leave you with some good news that everyone's been talking about. They came, they saw, they conquered. Of course, I'm talking about the U.S. women's team defending their World Cup in France after beating the Netherlands. And now the champs are back home. So take a look at them talking about their victory on GMA this morning.
Hi, all the little girls out there. I think by now you know that you can dream it, but make it possible. Go for your dreams. You got this.
Dream big, work hard, do whatever you have to do, but make it happen, because whatever you want to do in life, you can make it happen. Just dream big.
Always believe in yourself, and you have to work extremely hard every single day. You have to make sure that you're competing against yourself, and most of all, enjoy it as well.
I think that there is inspiration all around us. I'm super lucky to play around some of the most inspirational women in the world.
For any young player that has watched this tournament, don't doubt for 1 second that this could be you one day.
To all the kids out there, my college coach used to always tell me, embrace the opportunity, and I'm telling you that because when you dream big and when your opportunity comes and you embrace it full-heartedly, it's so worthwhile. Bye, guys.
Now, while overseas, Team USA was asked the one thing they wanted when they got home, and the answer, iced lattes. Our friends at GMA were kind enough to oblige, bringing them on set. So congratulations, I have mine, you guys get yours, so we can all be together and say, Team USA, we salute you. Absolutely amazing. And I'm gonna take a little taste if you don't mind. All right, guys, continue to take care of yourselves. And if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. and then check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, go to abcnews.com or download the app. I'm Kimberly Brooks, and I'll see you tomorrow.